Hi everyone, my name is John. Welcome back to my channel. In February, way back in February, I went on a little bit of a book buying binge at two places online, one of which was Princeton University Press, which I should be getting royalties really at this point from them. I promise you I get not a red penny. But I bought probably around 36 or 38 books from Princeton, which I have been teasing for a few months now. It's still in the works. But the other place I went shopping is the University of Chicago book sale. And I wanted to make this video before June because their sale is actually lasting through June 15th. So you have 2 more months, assuming the stock is still available, to pick up on any of the books I'm going to show you. I have 7 books that I bought, and hundreds of others that are in their catalog. I will try to remember to post a link to the PDF version of their catalog. Again, the sale is going on for another 2 months, so you have plenty of time. The only limitation would be maybe if they sell out of something, but I took advantage relatively early on, so I had an okay time. So 7 things. This is pretty much all history in one way or another. A couple of natural history books, which I usually don't go for, but I will go into why I got them. So at the top here is I don't know how new this is, a 2019. It's a biography of Louis XIV, King of France, called King of the World by Philip Mansell. Put out by, there's your Chicago label right there. And this purports to be a more global consideration of Louis XIV, with details about how he secured Spain for his descendants and his diplomatic relationships with parts of the world like Asia, Africa, and the Americas. I do a lot of medieval reading, but I'm not saying that Louis XIV is medieval, but that medieval reading usually limits me to England. So I don't, in any time period, really get too far across the English Channel and get to learn too much about France. So yes, this is well after the medieval period, I recognize that, but I don't know much about French history going far this back. I know more about, say, post-revolutionary France, but not stuff that's this early, and certainly not stuff that's earlier than this, which is really something I should start to rectify soon. But there's this, and then some social, psychological history, which has been one of the many things that I've always been interested in too. This is Those They Called Idiots: The Idea of the Disabled Mind from 1700 to the Present Day by Simon Jarrett. And this looks at some of the lives, documents, hospital records, things like that, of stuff that details lives of people with learning disabilities from mostly 18th and 19th century England, from what I understand. Harnesses evidence from things like court records, testimony, art, novels, also ideas of intelligence and how that's connected to race. Phrenology probably gets its place in here, stuff like that. But a topic of long-standing, long-standing interest. There's someone who wrote quite a bit on this subject named Roy Porter, who was a British historian working in the 70s, 80s, 90s. He wrote a lot of interesting books on topics very much like this, if you're also interested in that sort of thing. So this is one of the two natural history books I bought. This is called The Sounding of the Whale, and this is a whale of a book, to be quite honest. It is large. Let's see. Nearly 800 pages, but it's printed on this really thick, nice paper stock, so it probably looks bigger than that. But this is The Sounding of the Whale by D. Graham Burnett. And the subtitle there is Science and Cetaceans in the 20th Century. And it looks at natural history and science mixed in with, also it has its fair share of cultural and literary history too. And this is from some of the ad matter in the book. Tells the fascinating story of the transformation of cetaceans from grotesque monsters, useful only as wallowing kegs of fat and fertilizer, to playful friends of humanity, bellwethers of environmental devastations, and so I made a typo in my notes. Something about the counterculture in the age of Aquarius. Not sure what whales have to do with that, but we will see, I guess. This is, by the way, one of two whale books. I'll show you the other ones. The other one is more obviously related to what I want to do, which is read Moby Dick sometime in the somewhat near future. Well, a book I have never read before. So, the other book is, like I said, a much more obvious evocation of my wish to read Moby Dick, and that's Ahabs Rolling C, A Natural History of Moby Dick by Richard J. King. And this is a look at what Melville apparently knew about whales and whaling in the middle of the 19th century as he was writing Moby Dick. And then goes on to look at comparative views that, say, like Ahab and Ishmael had towards the ocean, adventuring, whaling, shipping, is much shorter because it is centered around a particular book. But the cetacean book, the other one, I figured might, give me some earlier and later perspective about a world which I know absolutely nothing. So there's this. And here's a book that's been on my radar for years and years and years, but I found it for something like $7 and just finally bit the bullet and bought it. This is Nosis and the Prophets of Modernism by Kathy Geer, or Gare. And this is kind of a work of cultural history / criticism. And when Arthur Evans discovered the palace complex of Nosis on the Isle of Crete, I think in the year 1900, if I'm not mistaken, it rose a lot of questions and was the source of inspiration for a lot of people about the origins of history and culture and art. And it offered artists, painters, musicians, composers a hope of a kind of a lost paradise that was situated in a society that had been lost to time. One that was at least thought to be, in their kind of idyllic version of a utopian society, pacifist, matriarchal, and pagan, and was the source of, like I said, inspiration for a lot of artists, from Freud to James Joyce to Giorgio de Chirico, the artist, Robert Graves, Hilda Doolittle. And this is a discussion of how the discovery of Gnosis sort of rekindled those ideas of an idyllic society, and how those ideas inspired and maybe came to fruition in some of their art and some of their work. That is, from a cursory understanding or reading of the summary matter, what this book is going to be about. Again, have known about it for years and years, but had to strike while the iron was hot and Well, the iron was inexpensive, more importantly. And two more. This is another book I've always wanted. It is a classic of mid 20th century historiography in the subject. I think it was originally published in the late 1950s, and it is kind of a standard in discussions on the topic. And this is Crisis of the House Divided by Harry Jaffa. The interpretation, or an interpretation, of the issues of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I think everyone knows, in 1858, Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln ran for Senate in the state of Illinois. Lincoln ends up losing to Douglas, but it was the source of several, I want to say 7, debates between the two people, and this book is, I guess, a consideration of those debates and the issues that come up in them. Don't know too much about it, other than the fact that it's important and it's something I need to read one of these days. And last but not least, I love literary history. And as soon as I read what this book was about, I knew that I wanted this book. This is a book about a peevish little person in Alexander Pope's life by the name of Edmund Curll, who was a publisher, sort of a gadfly in the bookish community in 18th century London. And the book is The Poet and the Publisher, The Case of Alexander Pope, Esquire, of Twickenham, versus Edmund Curll, bookseller in Grub Street. And it kind of tells the lifelong shit show, basically, of a relationship, and I do use that term loosely, between Pope and Edmund Curll, and the unending barbs that they exchanged and threw at one another in a series of literary journals, pamphlets, newspaper articles, over the course of Hanoverian London. Curll was one of the badly behaved booksellers in 18th century England who would just sell anything, including pornography. Would openly and unabashedly sell pornography in the 18th century in England just to make a buck. And caught a lot of flack for it. Obviously, his reputation was not something he cared about too much, because people didn't look as kindly on that as they do today. But looks like it could be really, really fascinating. Has, generally speaking, pretty good reviews too. So this is the last thing I have in my University of Chicago set of books. Within the next week, I promise, I will get, I think I've decided to do the Princeton University books in 3 videos. And I'll show you about a dozen books per video. I'll try to make them around 20 minutes apiece. But there's a lot to show, and I will get it out within a week or so. Also coming more book reviews too, because I have a lot of catching up to do. But until then, I will see you anon. Bye.